Am I a hole for cheating on my wife? I have been married to my wife for 10 years, and we have a 5-year-old son together. Our relationship began during a low point in both of our lives, and I think that's part of what brought us together. For the first 5 or 6 years, things were mostly good. But over time, I started to feel deeply unhappy with several aspects of our relationship, and the cracks in our foundation began to show. Both my wife and I come from difficult backgrounds. We grew up in families where yelling and shouting were the norm, and issues were never resolved. Both of our parents are chronic alcoholics. My father was physically and emotionally abusive, and I promised myself that I wouldn't let my son experience the kind of childhood I endured. I've tried to break those cycles. I don't like yelling during disagreements, and I believe in resolving issues calmly. My wife, on the other hand, yells and screams at even the smallest problem. She sees any issue I bring up as a personal attack and immediately goes on the defensive, leading to hours-long arguments. I know this behavior stems from her upbringing, but it doesn't make it any easier to live with. At times, our arguments have turned physical. My wife has hit me on multiple occasions, leaving bruises and scratches. She dismisses it, saying it doesn't matter because I'm big and she's small. I've never laid a hand on her or anyone else, but I convinced myself that her actions were okay because she was upset, and I didn't want to escalate things further. 6 years ago, I was ready to leave the relationship, but then we found out we were pregnant, and I decided to stay. I thought it was the right thing to do, for my wife, for our child, and for the family I wanted to build. During the pregnancy and the early months after our son's birth, our relationship improved. The fights became less frequent, and she didn't hit me during that period. But the peace didn't last. Over the past 4 years, things have gotten worse than ever before. My wife has refused every attempt I've made to go to couples counseling, and she won't allow me to talk to anyone about our relationship issues, saying, relationships are personal and should be worked out with your partner. She also refuses to give me space when I ask for it. Breaks are off the table because her ex used to demand space, and she won't tolerate it now. I've tried to communicate with her, but I've given up addressing small issues because I don't have the energy to argue for hours. She's never apologized for anything in our relationship and seems to believe she's never done anything wrong. About a year ago, I began seeing a psychologist through work as my mental health started to decline. My job in emergency services is already stressful, but feeling trapped in my marriage only made things worse. I realized I needed to leave the relationship for my son's sake and mine. I wanted him to grow up in 2 happy homes rather than one dysfunctional one. But when I told my wife I wanted to leave, she threatened to move back to the north of New Zealand with our son, cutting off my access to him. Knowing how family courts in New Zealand typically favor mothers, I felt cornered. I consulted a family lawyer for advice and started planning my exit carefully. In the meantime, I stayed in the relationship, avoiding conflict to keep the peace. A few months ago, my mental health hit a breaking point. At work, I broke down in front of my colleague, who had been in an abusive relationship herself. She noticed I was struggling and started offering advice. Over the course of a month, we grew closer through shared experiences, and one thing led to another. We ended up sleeping together. It wasn't just physical. For the first time in years, I felt emotionally supported. She genuinely cared about me and gave me the compassion I'd been yearning for in my marriage. I told my psychologist about the affair, admitting I didn't feel guilty about it, and that made me feel even worse. My psychologist reassured me that it was a natural response to being denied emotional needs for so long. About a month ago, my wife went through my phone while I was asleep. She found evidence of the affair and woke me by throwing my phone at my face and punching me multiple times. I managed to film her assaulting me, and I sent the video to my lawyer after she again threatened to take my son away from me. Strangely, she later called the police on herself, claiming they would sympathize with her because of my infidelity. The police took statements and asked if I wanted to press charges. While I haven't decided yet, I know a conviction could cost her teaching license. Despite everything, I don't want her to lose her job. She still needs to provide for our son when he's with her, and I don't want her to suffer unnecessarily. For now, I've moved out and feel relief in having space to breathe. My son mostly stays with me, though I'm anxious every time he spends the night with her. Her family has been relentless, sending me death threats and calling me disgusting for cheating. They don't care about the abuse I endured or her threats to take my son away. To them, my infidelity erases everything else. I understand their anger, but I can't help but feel that they're ignoring the larger context. I'm at a crossroads. I don't regret leaving, but I hate how messy and painful this process has become. I know I'm not blameless. I cheated, and that's on me. But I also know that my actions were born out of years of emotional neglect and feeling trapped. I cheated on my wife, and I take responsibility for that. But am I the jerk for finally seeking the emotional support I wasn't getting at home? Or for staying in a toxic relationship as long as I did because I was afraid of losing my son? I'm struggling to reconcile my actions with the person I want to be, and I don't know if I made the right choices.
Am I a hole for cutting off my pregnant friend after she was ungrateful for my gifts? I made friends with a person about a year ago. She's someone who struggles with her mental health and doesn't have a stable living situation. She doesn't live with her mother, and she doesn't work. From the start, I've been incredibly supportive. I gave her help when she needed it, provided money, food, and offered my time, thinking I was being a good friend. But in hindsight, I feel like she was taking advantage of my kindness. She would invite me over, and then, just before I arrived, tell me not to bother because her other friends were already there and didn't need me. It became clear that I was being used more for what I could offer than for genuine companionship. Despite that, I continued to give her the benefit of the doubt, thinking she just had a tough time. Not long ago, she found out she was pregnant after a one-night stand at a friend's university dorm. While the situation wasn't ideal, I wanted to support her, knowing she didn't have much financial or emotional help. She decided to keep the pregnancy, and I congratulated her, offering my support through it all. A month later, she was hosting a Christmas party, and I thought it would be a nice surprise to buy her some baby items. I knew she didn't have a lot of money, and I wanted to help in any way I could. Despite being a university student myself and not having much to spare, I bought her a few baby things. I hoped it would be a gesture she would appreciate and find useful. A week later, I messaged her to ask how her scan had gone, and that's when everything took a turn. She responded with a message that really hurt me. She said, "It's really insensitive to buy a pregnant person baby things because I'm separate from the baby, and I wanted stuff for me too. I'm sick of people only speaking to me about the baby and not about me. If you're gonna buy baby bits, make sure you buy me stuff too, because I don't want to be forgotten about." At first, I tried to be understanding, thinking it might just be hormones or stress from the pregnancy. But to be honest, it came across as incredibly ungrateful and rude. I had put effort into getting her something she would need and thought she'd appreciate. I had always been there for her, checking in on how she was doing, buying her things, and offering my time. Yet, this is how she responded. After that message, I didn't respond immediately. I just felt hurt and frankly used. I thought it was time to step back, and so I decided to block her. I didn't want to be part of someone's life who took advantage of my kindness without ever acknowledging it or offering any gratitude. 3 weeks went by, and I didn't hear from her. Then, I got a message on Instagram with a request to know why I had blocked her on Snapchat. She accused me of abandoning her and the baby. She reiterated that she still felt that the baby items were insensitive and said, "If you want to leave, just go. I don't need you." At this point, I realized that her behavior wasn't just a one-off, it was a pattern. She constantly made herself out to be the victim and expected everyone around her to cater to her needs. I didn't respond, and I still haven't. I was hurt by her words, and honestly, I don't want to play into her constant victim spiral. After this, I spoke to one of her former friends who filled me in on some things I hadn't known. She told me that my friend has a long history of playing the victim and expecting others to cater to her, no matter how much they gave or how hard they tried. I realized that I had been a part of that cycle, constantly trying to make her feel better without ever getting the respect or gratitude I deserved. Now, I'm left wondering if I was wrong for cutting her off. I had been supportive, but it feels like everything I did was taken for granted. It's hard to be there for someone who only takes, but never gives, especially when they push you aside once they've gotten what they need from you. So, now I'm asking, was I wrong to cut her off? I understand that pregnancy can be an emotional time, but she made no effort to appreciate what I did for her. And now, despite everything, I'm the one being called the by her and her remaining friends. I feel like I was justified in stepping away, but I want to know if I overreacted or if I was right to set boundaries. Am I a hole for stepping in when my husband's family were putting him down? My husband is one of the kindest, most gentle souls I've ever met. We've been together for 8 years, and I fell for him almost immediately. He's compassionate, nurturing, and genuinely good-hearted, qualities I treasure about him. But his family? They've always been a sore point for him and, increasingly, for me. From early in our relationship, he shared how different he felt from them. He's quiet and introverted, the polar opposite of his extroverted, sports-loving family. His dad and brothers played football until college, while his mom and sisters were cheerleaders. That's their world, and they view anyone outside it, especially my husband, with disdain. I knew it hurt him, but I never realized just how deep that hurt went until a few days ago. When we celebrated Christmas with my grandfather, my husband was happy and relaxed. But we had to attend a late celebration at his parents' house afterward, and the mere thought of it stressed him out. He almost decided not to go, but a text from his mom guilt him into it. I offered to stay home and skip the whole ordeal, but he reluctantly agreed to go. The comments started almost immediately. At first, they were the usual backhanded jabs, teasing him for being quiet or joking about how different he is from the rest of them. But this time, it escalated. His brothers started saying things like, "We always thought you'd die a virgin," and speculating which of us was gay and using the other as a beard. They mocked the idea that I could love him, claiming they couldn't imagine anyone wanting him. It was cruel and relentless. Then his parents joined in, criticizing his job for being at a computer all day and calling it not a man's job. They implied he wasn't a real man because he wasn't into sports or doing physical labor. His sisters piled on, recounting how their high school friends made fun of him for being weird and how they couldn't believe any girl would think he was sweet. The final blow came when his dad outright called him defective, and his siblings laughed while his mom looked like she agreed. That's when I couldn't stay silent anymore. I told them there was absolutely nothing defective about my husband. I said they were the ones who were flawed, bullies who couldn't accept anyone different from themselves. I pointed out that there's nothing wrong with not liking football or cheerleading, just as there's nothing wrong with being passionate about those things. But what is wrong, I said, is tearing someone down for being different. I told them that my husband is compassionate, kind, and respectful, and that's more than I could say for them. I asked when they last showed him any love or support and pointed out that their entire dynamic was abusive. I reminded them that he's their son and brother, and instead of lifting him up, they've spent his whole life tearing him down. I ended by saying he deserved so much better than their disgusting behavior. The room went silent until one of his brothers called me a and my husband, who rarely raises his voice, simply said, "No, just no." His quiet but firm response stunned everyone. We left immediately, and he encouraged me not to look back. Since then, he hasn't responded to any of their calls or texts, though they've sent countless messages accusing me of being the for how I spoke to them. In the days that followed, my husband made a life-changing decision. He's going to start therapy. He told me he wants to process his feelings and learn to stand up for himself, not just for his sake, but for mine and for our future children. He also said how much he appreciated me stepping in, even if his family doesn't. But part of me wonders if I went too far. Was it wrong to call them bullies and should I have held back to avoid escalating the situation? On the other hand, watching them treat my husband that way felt unbearable, and I couldn't stand by and let it happen. I'm torn. Did I cross a line by calling out their behavior so harshly, or was it necessary to protect my husband from years of emotional abuse? He's grateful, but his family is furious, and I can't help but second-guess myself. Am I a whole for refusing to give my lottery winnings to my family after they excluded me from a family trip? I, 28, come from a family of 5, my parents, my brother 30, my sister 25, and me. Growing up, I always felt like the odd one out. While I wasn't outright ignored, it was clear that my siblings were the golden children, receiving more attention, praise, and support from our parents. I was the black sheep, the one they didn't seem to expect much from. Over time, I learned to accept my role in the family dynamic. I focused on building my own life, working hard to support myself and trying not to let the favoritism bother me too much. But recently, that favoritism reared its head in a way that I couldn't ignore. A few months ago, my family planned a big overseas trip. I didn't even know about it until I saw my sister posting about it on Instagram. When I asked why I hadn't been included, my mom casually said, "We didn't think you'd want to come, and besides, we're tight on budget." The words stung. It wasn't just that they excluded me, it was the lack of consideration. They didn't even bother asking if I'd be interested or could contribute financially to make it easier for everyone. It hurt, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. I let it go, as I had with so many other slights over the years. Fast forward to a month ago when everything changed. On a whim, I bought a lottery ticket and won over $2 million. The news felt surreal. I knew I had to be careful, so I made a plan. I paid off my debts, invested a significant portion, and set aside some for enjoyment and emergencies. At first, I didn't tell my family about the win. I didn't want them to treat me differently or start expecting things from me. But eventually, the secret got out, likely because I treated myself to a new car. As soon as my family found out, the dynamic shifted. Suddenly, they were all reaching out, not to congratulate me, but to make demands. My mom said I was selfish for keeping all that money to myself when they were struggling, a surprising claim, given their expensive vacation. My sister hinted that I should pay off her student loans, and my brother outright asked me to buy him a house. When I calmly explained that I wasn't obligated to share my winnings, especially considering how they've treated me, they didn't take it well. I brought up the trip as an example of how I've been excluded, and my dad brushed it off, saying, "That was different. This is family money." Family money? I bought the ticket with my own money, but somehow, they felt entitled to it just because we're related. Now, they're calling me an ungrateful brat and accusing me of ruining the family dynamic. My mom has been particularly vocal, guilt-tripping me about how she sacrificed so much for me growing up. My siblings are acting like I'm hoarding the money out of spite, and my dad keeps repeating that I'm being selfish. But here's the thing. I've spent years feeling like an afterthought in my own family. I've always had to fight for their attention and respect, and now they're expecting me to bail them out without so much as a thank you for the hard work I've done to build my life. This isn't about the money. It's about how they've treated me for years and the entitlement they're showing now. I don't think I'm in the wrong for wanting to keep my lottery winnings for myself, especially after being excluded from their lives in so many ways. But their reactions have made me question if I'm being too harsh. Am I the for refusing to share my winnings with a family that has always treated me like an afterthought?